I'm delighted to have the CEO of the Green Finance Institute with me. Welcome.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Indeed. We've known each other for quite some time, and I know the GFI, if I can be colloquial about it, has gone from strength to strength. And I would love to hear from you. What is making you optimistic? We're sitting in London, we're talking about sustainable finance. We also know that the world is on track for somewhere between 2.7 to 3.2 degrees warming instead of our real goal of 1.5 degree. Give us some optimism, Rhian-Mari.
Well, that obviously doesn't sound too optimistic when you put it like that. But, I get asked this a lot, and I'm not ducking the question, but I am going to quote Anne-Marie Lovins, the pioneering physicist and climate expert, who says he doesn't believe in either pessimism or optimism because they're both forms of fatalism. What he believes in is applied hope, that things can get better, but we're going to have to make them so. And to answer your question, I genuinely think we can make them so. So yes, we're not on track on the temperatures, and we're also not on track with the finance flows. So according to the Climate Policy Initiative data, we need to get to $9 trillion globally climate finance flows by 2030. Last year, according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, we hit 1.8 trillion. So we were up 17% globally, and it was a new record. And 2022 was obviously an important year for climate finance flows because that was the first year where we actually surpassed clean energy investments, surpassed the amount of finance that was being invested in oil and gas, new exploration. And we're never going to go back on that. So look, these indicators are in the right direction. But what do I think is going to help us accelerate finance and what's going to help us get this money moving at greater pace and scale? And there, too, I think there are some real positive signs. Coming out of COP in Dubai last year, I know there were a number of people who were very disappointed that we didn't get to phase out language on oil and gas. But as somebody who spent most of my career in the private sector, as you know, I came back with quite a different narrative, which was I was really pleased to hear how this conversation about climate finance is moving very much into the how, into the implementation. And this is why we're seeing this proliferation of country platforms, more talk about blended finance, talking about how the MDBs, the multilateral development banks, can play an even greater role at trying to catalyze the private capital. And of course, the private capital, in principle, is already committed. We have the 400 signatories of GFAN saying, yes, they have their net zero plans in place. And now it's a matter of how do we bring all those jigsaw pieces together to actually create those opportunities for money to be moved at scale. And the whole thing obviously underpinned by data, but I don't need to tell you that.
Well, no, but it's always great to hear because certainly we agree that, you've just given me a number of data points and it allows us to at least ground ourselves when we're starting to think about what's next. Question for you. I know you've been investigating supply chains and supply chain finance and thinking about how banks get involved. And certainly it's something that's really of keen interest to CDP. We're already working with the likes of HSBC and Citibank to create some supply chain finance opportunities for those that disclose and create transparency. So, we get this. And 20% of European businesses surveyed by Oliver Wyman earlier this year, together with CDP, show that they are really nervous about losing business on the basis of their climate emissions reporting. So if we partner these things up, is this another place that when we talk about finance and we talk about sort of the capital markets, that we should be getting more practical?
Absolutely. And look, the signals are all there in the noise, right? We're evolving as an asset class, we're evolving as a community. But anyone that thinks that this is all going to reverse really isn't paying the attention. So I'm glad you mentioned the point about supply chains because often this conversation focuses on the large publicly listed companies where we're seeing increasing regulation around disclosures and transition planning, all of which is to be welcomed. But also, especially in a number of emerging markets, a lot of the businesses in those emerging markets are SMEs. And so how do we actually help them with their emissions data, with their transition journey? And we are seeing examples of how some of the large multinationals, as you say, they are accelerating that. But this is where it can't all be market-led. And this is obviously what we do at the GFI, as you know, Sherry, is we sit at that nexus between the policymakers and the financial institutions. And we look at not only what the enabling policy environments need to look like, but we do focus a lot on what are the financial mechanisms that you need. So you mentioned the supply chains, where we've looked at various types of instruments that actually give you a preferential rate if you can demonstrate that your supply chain is cleaner and greener. But we've got some really fabulous examples of where we're seeing real innovation, working with both policymakers, philanthropic capital, and we'd love to see more philanthropic capital as genuine philanthropic venture, taking risk. So philanthropic venture capital is hopefully a new asset class, and also obviously the large commercial players. And we have so many examples I could share with you. If we just look in the UK, work that we've been doing on utilisation linked finance. So that is where, when you're looking at building a charge point infrastructure, you don't have the data, you don't have the performance data about what the utilisation will be. So you end up in this chicken and egg situation where people say, okay, I'd love to buy an electric vehicle, but I have range anxiety in case I ever want to drive up to rural Scotland. And in rural Scotland, they're saying, well, we'd love to build charge points, but we're not sure how much they'll be used. So the solution there through finance is to provide a loan to those developers that doesn't need to get repaid until utilisation hits a certain threshold. So we've actually piloted this in Orkney, which for your viewers around the world is in the very north of Scotland, an island off the north of Scotland. And we've done it with the Rabobank, the division of Rabobank called DLL, where actually what's been really interesting about this, because we're all learning by doing in this space, is we assumed it would be the developers that would want such a loan. In fact, it's been the local businesses. It's been the B&Bs, it's been the local convenience stores. And then what's interesting is the finance by itself obviously shouldn't be a blocker, but isn't always the full solution. And what we've discovered through doing this work is there aren't enough electricians. And so now we're actually trying to work to make sure that, you know, there's been so much demand for the charge points using this loan that now we're having to work through that particular challenge. And so this goes to my point, if I may, which is, you know, I started off by saying one of the things that I feel is really positive about this dialogue is we're starting to see that shift of that sort of top-down focus, not just on targets and long-term commitments, but into real implementable coalitions, collaborations. None of this is going to happen by osmosis. We need to bring people together. And we need that top-down approach, but we also need the granular bottom-up solutions as well that we can then quickly scale and replicate. And the same goes for some of the work we're doing with local authorities around the UK, so local climate bonds with our partners at Abundance, where you actually can crowdfund from the local community. They invest in their local community in a yielding security. That money then gets invested in green projects that benefit the community. And what's fantastic, we've raised about 23 million, so still small compared to the billions that we could do. But what's been really interesting is we've looked at the demographic of people that have been investing in the local climate bonds. And it isn't just the top social demographic bands, it's actually people right across, which just shows how people want to get involved.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I could talk to you all day, and certainly some of the pieces that you've picked up are things that are very near and dear to CDP's heart. This concept of the SMEs and making sure that they're included in this journey. And this year we've launched an SME questionnaire in order to be able to encourage more disclosure and more transparency and to get on that bandwagon so that actually maybe some of these very practical real economy decisions can be made even more efficiently and effectively in the future. So with those fingers crossed and hearing so much of your great work, please do continue it. Thank you for everything that you're doing. Thank you for your partnership. And I'm going to throw back to Merla.